Okay, this is issue number 52 and 51 of the Kaiju Engine. And this is hot off the heels of my last commit of issue number 49, I believe. Um, so the first thing I want to do is I want to make it so that we don't bind a certain shader multiple times in one frame. We only want to bind it once. So the way that we're going to set that up is we're going to need something outside of the draw instance groups. We'll probably call it shader draw, something like that. Package rendering. Now, that's going to pull the shader out of the draw group, but it's going to add an array of draw instance groups into this structure. So we'll make a type shader draw struct. We're gonna pull this from here, and then we're gonna have instance groups, draw instance groups. So that means we'll strip the shader out of this new here, and then we can add in a new shader draw, create an instance group, and also add an instance group to the instance groups. These are not going to need to be exposed outside of here, outside of rendering, and neither is the shader technically. I shouldn't have refactored. It's taking forever. I'm just going to change it manually while it figures out what it's doing. I, and I. Okay. And we'll deal with removing them later. How we're going to deal with those and when instance groups run out of instances to draw, that sort of stuff. That's going to be a whole other thing because if we lose an instance halfway through this array, how are we going to deal with compressing that, or if instances are turned off, we are not going to render them. So if an instance is off and we don't render it, that means there's going to be a gap in the block of data that we're going to be copying over, and it's not going to be this linear thing. So that's going to be a whole separate issue that we're going to have to deal with. For now, we are going to change our render draw function to be, we'll still call it drawings, that's fine. And then we're going to call it shader draw. So all the shaders we plan on drawing here. So let's go over here, change this to shader draw, and then we can do for blank and SD range drawings, and then we can have our for loop here in SD dot instance groups, and then move our shader ID up here and our use program up here, and our set global uniforms up there as well. After we use the program, of course. So SD shader, lowercase s, and then this is going to be SD shader. So now we are going to do all the instance stuff separately, and we've got our shaders being bound once. So now inside of the main, what this is going to look like is we're going to need a shader group here. So our shader draw, rendering new shader draw of the shader, and the SD add instance group, and then here we can pass in dot shader draw SD. This is a pointer. We don't need this to be a pointer yet. Okay. So that should make that portion happy. And this no longer needs the shader to be passed in for the group. Okay, let's make sure it still runs as it was with our two triangles. Okay, still running as our two triangles. So we'll leave it there. We'll make it a little more complicated when we uh, set up removing and running out of instances and how they get removed and activating and deactivating, all that sort of stuff. Okay, that was issue number 52. So now we're going to go and move on to issue number 51, which is going to be dealing with our texture that we're creating and deleting all the time. So what we're going to do is we're going to take essentially this section here, here. We're going to take that section and we are going to move it into our draw instance. Func d draw instance group update texture, or we'll say generate texture, and we'll call this we'll grab this GL handle, we will make a texture data GL handle, and what we're going to do is when we add an instance, we are going to d.generate texture. So texture data. So d.texture data into those. So the first thing we need to do is we need to destroy the texture, which I'm pretty sure GL doesn't care if it's null, it just does nothing. Same way that free works in C. So GL, let's actually just grab this because we don't want to hear anyways. We're going to destroy the texture, and then we're going to generate the texture. Let's see, bind the texture. This setting of data we're going to deal with later, and then we're going to unbind the texture. So here when we're doing update data, and we're copying this instance data over, we can actually just pump it into the texture data right at the end here. But we will need to bind the texture and unbind the texture. Oops. Okay. And this instance data is essentially going to be our d.instance data and d.instance data 0. So let's do that. Bind texture. This texture is not accessible currently, so we need to do a capital T, and then we can change this to draw.texture data is what we're going to bind as the active texture. So now we're going to essentially be destroying and recreating that texture only when we add an instance, and then we update the textures data every time we go through here. So let's take a peek and see if that makes it happy. Everything works correctly still. Okay, it's still working here, but we're going to want to change some data just to make sure that it's working. So similarly to the weird rotation thing that I haven't fixed yet, I'm just going to translate the model, the second one. It's going to start off at 0, and then we're going to translate it at the end of the frame by some small amount delta time. Say 0.5, and matrix.float on that guy. And we'll see, there we go, updating every frame. We can make that a little bit smaller, and we can, we don't need that translate anymore. Just use the identity matrix at the start. There we go. So now it's updating every frame, and it's updating that texture data, which is controlling its model matrix. So yeah, I think that was easy enough. Again, in a later one, we're going to have to deal with removing instances um, and how that affects the shader groups and all of that. But for now, I'd call these two guys done.